Hey guys, tonight we time travel to the chilly, wind-scraped steppes of Central Asia where the smoke from 1,000 cooking fires curls into a sky so wide it makes your dreams feel small. You're not wearing fleece, you're wearing scratchy wool, smelling faintly of sheep and last night's stew. Around you, herders nudge yaks, soldiers sharpen arrowheads, and someone's loudly slurping soup in the next yurt over. You're standing in a Mongol ger or yurt, round tent made of felt, wood, and the firm belief that a portable empire is still an empire. The air is warm and dense with the scent of lamb fat, sizzling dough, and boiled onions. On the stove, which is just a fire ring surrounded by blackened rocks, a pot bubbles with suspicious enthusiasm. A grandmother-like figure pokes it with a ladle carved from horn. She gestures to you. "Eat," she says, without looking up. "Congratulations. You're about to taste the unassuming secret weapon of the Mongol Empire, a chunky, fatty, smoky stew that may or may not contain horse meat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to post your location and what time you're watching. I'm always curious who's falling asleep to this stuff. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You spoon up a mouthful, and it's surprisingly tender. The stew, known as budog when roasted inside a goat's own skin, or simply cork hog when simmered with hot stones, is every Mongol's comfort food. It's meat-forward, unapologetically greasy, and powered the conquests of one of history's most feared horseback empires. Forget Michelin stars, this is the food of survival, strategy, and surprise seasoning. You chew thoughtfully. Somewhere outside, a dog barks at the wind, and a detail hits you. This isn't just a meal. This is fuel for a culture built on constant motion. Mongol cuisine had to be portable, durable, and ideally edible 3 days later when stuffed in a saddlebag. Fresh veggies, dream on, spices. Maybe if you looted a Chinese spice caravan last week. But what Mongols lacked in variety, they made up for in ingenuity. Historians still argue whether early Mongol dishes were adapted from Chinese, Turkic, or indigenous steppe roots. But there's one thing they agree on. The stew was sacred. Families had versions passed down like myths. Some boiled it with pine needles for aroma. Others added fermented milk for a tangy kick that either delighted or mildly poisoned guests. Anecdotes tell of Genghis Khan himself pausing a campaign just to sit with his troops around the fire, sharing the same fatty broth as the lowest archer. A propaganda move. Maybe, the man really loved soup. You lift the wooden bowl closer, and steam fogs your eyelashes. Someone next to you fumbles a saddlebag open to sprinkle in what looks like dried garlic, an imported luxury from the south. Another cook adds horse fat, which melts into silken swirls across the surface. The smell now is both comforting and slightly alarming. A fringe detail. Mongol cooks often used heated stones, plucked straight from the fire, to flash boil the inside of the pot. Or, if you're feeling adventurous, the inside of an actual animal carcass. That's right, budog is traditionally made by stuffing a whole goat with hot rocks and then sealing it like a grotesque meat thermos. You, dear listener, will be spared the goat prep visuals. For now, still hungry? Good, because next up comes the bread, flat, chewy, and tough enough to patch a boot, if necessary. No yeast, here just flour, water, salt, and an existential acceptance of blandness. You tear a piece off and dunk it in your stew, where it transforms from tasteless leather to savory sponge. Outside the you hear children chasing each other, shrieking in a language full of throaty laughter. The wind whistles a lullaby across the plains. In the corner of the yurt, an elder sharpens a bone knife while humming a tune about sheep or war. It's hard to tell which. Then someone mentions the fat ration. That's right, in the Mongol army, meat wasn't even the most prized part of the animal. It was the fat, stored, traded, rendered into tallow, and smeared onto everything from weapons to baby skin. Fat was survival gold. Soldiers would sometimes trade a knife for a lump of it. You look down at your stew and begin to appreciate just how many calories you're consuming per spoonful. Let's just say, this dinner isn't Whole30 compliant. Now, here's a tidbit. There's debate among scholars over how much influence conquered cuisines had on core Mongol food. Some argue the Mongols resisted outside ingredients, preferring their tried-and-true dishes. Others suggest they eagerly absorbed what worked, like culinary magpies. The truth probably lies somewhere between stew, loyalty, and opportunistic spice. Theft. You look around the firelit circle. Everyone is eating the same thing. No garnishes, no dessert menu, no lactose warnings, just shared bowls, shared fat, and a sense that tonight's dinner might power tomorrow's conquest. That as the fire crackles lower, and your bowl empties, you feel at that moment of fullness that isn't just about food. It's about being part of a rhythm older than cities, the kind of meal that built an empire, not with forks and knives, but with bones and grit. Your eyes get heavy. Outside, the wind hasn't stopped. It never does. The next morning, or what passes for it, when you're woken by a rooster, that sounds vaguely like it's judging you. The camp is already alive. Smoke rises from cooking fires, mixing with the icy breath of dawn. Your bones creak from sleeping on packed earth, and your blanket smells faintly of goat. Again, you stretch, yawn, and wander outside the gur, only to nearly trip over a leather satchel hanging from a saddle, dripping something pale and sour into the grass. This, dear traveler, is your introduction to the Mongol Empire's high-octane breakfast of champions. Fermented mare's milk, better known as arrowhead. You hesitate, then sip. It's cold, frothy, and tastes like someone dared a yogurt to be rude, but it hits the spot. Arrowhead was the Mongol version of a protein shake, hydrating, and possibly the only drink on earth that doubles as a mild laxative and ceremonial offering. You glance around and realize you're surrounded by milk. Mare's milk, goat's milk, sheep's milk, every variety being stirred, churned, fermented, or traded. The Mongol economy was dairy-fueled. Long before lactose intolerance was a meme, milk was more than Fuditua's identity, culture, currency, and even divine favor. Now, here's a little-known fact. Some of the Khan's elite couriers would travel hundreds of miles with nothing but dried curds and arrowhead. No pita, no peanut butter, just hardened cheese the size of stones and a wineskin full of fizzy mare milk. And they still made Amazon Prime look slow. The dried curds, called arrowheads, were tough enough to break a tooth if you weren't careful, but they lasted forever. Literally, some unearthed by archaeologists are still technically edible, though you'd need the dental fortitude of a Viking and the desperation of a camel to try. You're handed a piece of this historic snack by a boy who looks no older than 8, but rides like a war general. He grins. You chew. It's like tangy chalk made from determination and dairy. You nod politely. Back in the day, the Mongols believed that food made from horses, especially milk and blood, carried spiritual potency. Blood. Yes, you heard right. In extreme conditions, Mongol riders would nick a vein on their horse's neck, collect a bit of blood, and drink it. It sounds brutal, but it was often just a survival tactic. A quick shot of iron and protein during long, foodless rides. The horses weren't killed. They were trusted companions, not lunch. Usually, historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or only done in dire straits. Some accounts romanticize it, others downplay it. What we do know is that the ability to ride 100 miles a day and live off horse-based snacks made Mongol warriors a logistical nightmare for their enemies. And then there were the milk routes, unofficial networks where local herders and military messengers traded fermented dairy and gossip with equal urgency. Some scholars even suggest that arrowhead was part of diplomatic rituals, passed around before treaty talks like a fizzy, alcoholic olive branch. You step away from the milky chaos and wander toward a group of older riders saddling up. One ties a leather bag to his horse's side. Inside, blood sausage. Don't look so surprised. Known as kel, it was made by boiling fresh horse blood with millet or barley and stuffing it into intestines, a delicacy among the steppe crowd. Low waste, high iron, slightly alarming if you're squeamish, and yet, you can't deny it. Everything here has a purpose. No part of the animal is wasted. Bones are tools. Fat is treasure. Milk is life. Even dung gets a second act as fuel. Mongols dried it and burned it for heat, often while boiling soup. That's right, your breakfast might have been cooked over yesterday's yak poop. This, too, is part of the Mongol genius. Efficiency wrapped in tradition. You eat what travels. You preserve what can't rot. You respect the animal so thoroughly that even its shadow seems recycled. A fringe tidbit, it's said that Genghis Khan had a preferred mare whose milk he would only drink on days of battle. Was it superstition, or did he genuinely believe in milk-powered victory? The records are murky, but it does give the phrase, power smoothie, a whole new meaning. You return to camp and someone hands you a warm bowl of curdled milk soup with dried venison and a dollop of animal fat on top. It's creamy, salty, oddly comforting, like a hug from a cousin you forgot you had. Outside, the wind kicks up again. The yurts flap and creak, sounding like tired lungs. A cook pours a ladle of boiling water over a cloth bag filled with herb step tea, bitter and smoky. You sip, and your chest warms as your eyelids grow heavy. The day ahead will be full of marching, hunting, and probably yelling at sheep. But for now, your belly is full, your hands are warm, and you're slowly beginning to understand how a nomadic empire fueled itself with nothing but milk, meat, and sheer willpower. By mid-morning, you've finally begun to appreciate the strange poetry of Mongol logistics. The empire didn't just conquer on horseback, kit-catered. Imagine hundreds of thousands of troops stretching across thousands of miles, and somehow, everyone still gets dinner. Welcome to the miracle of the mobile kitchen. You're trudging beside one now a massive cart creaking over the steppe, piled high with sacks, hides, cooking pots, and one extremely annoyed chicken. The cart belongs to a noblewoman whose name you cannot pronounce, but whose authority is absolute. She's not just a wife or mother, she's a general of sustenance, commanding a small culinary army that keeps the stomachs of warriors, children, and ambassadors full. Inside the cart, which smells like smoke and coriander, a teenage girl is kneading dough with her elbows, because her hands are busy gutting a fish. A toddler gnaws on dried cheese, while a dog licks something mysterious off the floor. You glance at the roof, where pots are lashed with strips of camel hide. The cart sways and clanks like a gourmet rickshaw, headed nowhere and everywhere at once. This, you learn, is the moving kitchen of the elite. Not everyone had it this good. Of course, most Mongol warriors ate what they could carry, but for high-born families and court entourages, the gear-cart system allowed even multi-course meals to follow them across deserts and battlefields. Historians still debate whether these carts were a strictly Mongol innovation or borrowed from neighboring nomadic cultures, but no one questions their brilliance. They weren't just storage. They were rolling kitchens, dining rooms, and gossip centers. You could cook dinner, plan a marriage alliance, and yell at your children all in one place, without ever stopping. You reach out and touch one of the carts. The wood is dark with age, the wheels patched with iron. Beneath the cart, a small hanging cauldron swings with a quiet clunk, containing something that smells like cabbage's rebellious cousin. Then there's the butter situation. Oh yeah, often carried multiple skins filled with churning milk. As the cart rolled, the motion naturally turned the milk into butter. That's right, Mongol butter was made by vibration, and some of it, like the prized yellow butter used in ceremonial offerings, was considered worthy of gods and guests alike. A quirky tidbit for you: when Mongols entered conquered cities, noble women often set up their cart kitchens right in the streets, offering arrowhead dumplings or soups to locals as both peace gesture and subtle dominance. Flex. Imagine riding into Baghdad and setting up a stewing goat next to a palace. That's confidence. You pause beside another cart, this one rattling with spice boxes and bone-handled ladles. A young cook is stirring gurultai shul, a meat and noodle soup so simple it's practically a hug in a bowl. She tears herbs with her teeth and tosses them in. You take a sip and immediately feel warmer. It's greasy, salty, and weirdly reminds you of instant ramen that's grown up and learned diplomacy. Then, with a lurch, the caravan moves again. The oxen groan, and a baby starts crying. A woman straps the child to her back and stirs soup. With one hand, you realize the Mongol Empire wasn't just built by soldiers, but by multitaskers in motion. This was an empire on wheels, and every pot, every piece of bread dough, every boiling skin of milk was part of its infrastructure. Oh, and, speaking of wheels, don't be surprised to find a pot of rice tied to one. As the wheel turns, the rice shakes and settles. By noon, it's half-cooked from friction and heat. Add some broth, maybe dried lamb bits, and boom-mobile lunch. Historians still argue whether these meals were nutritional masterpieces or barely edible survival mush, but accounts from both allies and enemies note how the Mongols always seemed well-fed, well-organized, and somehow never late for dinner. You close your eyes for a moment, lulled by the rhythmic creaking of the cart. The smell of garlic oil and horse sweat blends in your nose like an ancient cologne. A woman nearby sings softly in a minor key while slicing turnips with a knife that once belonged to her grandmother. You watch her toss the slices into a bubbling pot with a flick of her wrist that says, "I've done this through 3 invasions." Even now, rolling across an invisible empire, you can feel the pulse of Mongol power, not in flags or swords, but in food, in the simple, constant act of feeding, comforting, and preparing. These carts were battlefields of their own, one not with arrows, but with soups that never ran out. As the sun climbs and the carts roll on, you sit beneath a hanging bundle of onions, stomach full, head heavy, swaying gently with the road. You're half dozing in the shade of a cabbage-scented tarp when a sudden gust of wind lifts the edge of the cart's hide curtain and you catch a glimpse of something strange. Charred bones, lots of them, piled beside a cracked ceramic pot with blackened edges. The bones are goat, mostly, some sheep, all well used, chewed, maybe even split for marrow. You blink, and one of the cart cooks casually tosses another scorched femur on the pile. This isn't waste. This is history. Fast forward a few centuries and imagine a team of archaeologists discovered, sunburnt, and absurdly enthusiastic kneeling in this exact spot, brushing sand off those very bones. These digs, conducted across former Mongol encampments and city ruins, are a goldmine for culinary detectives. What did the Mongols really eat? How did they cook it? And, more importantly, how many goats is too many goats? You're now tagging along with one such imaginary dig. There's no sunscreen, and your kneecaps hurt, but someone has just unearthed a greasy soot-blackened pot still, faintly reeking of meat smoke. It's dented, handmade, and weirdly heavy, and it tells a story. Historians still argue whether these cooking vessels were traded from Persia or made locally on the steppe. Either way, they're nearly indestructible. Some had a dual use, cooking by day, hammering nails by night. A true multitasker, much like the women who used them. A quirky tidbit, residue analysis on some of these ancient pots reveals layers of fat baked in over time. Think of it like culinary sediment. One study found sheep tallow at the base, followed by goat, followed by what might be yak or camel. The debate rages on in specialist footnotes. Either way, that's centuries of stew-stained storytelling. You wander a bit farther through the dig site, where another team member waves you over. He's crouched by what appears to be a midna, fancy archaeological term for an ancient trash pile. But oh, what a pile it is. Cracked bones, broken plates, even a bit of charred bread still, holding the ghost of a bite. Turns out, Mongol garbage is the best kind of history, because while royal scrolls and war chronicles are biased, bones don't lie. They say, "We've boiled this goat right here." And yes, we dropped some of it. In one particularly exciting find from Karakorum, the Mongol capital archaeologists uncovered a discarded pile of fish bones and charred millet. This shocked a few scholars, who assumed Mongol diets were strictly land-based. Turns out, rivers mattered too. And Mongols weren't picky when it came to protein. If it swam, it simmered. Another fun discovery: animal teeth used as cooking tools. Some were pierced and strung like beads, possibly to stir or skewer. Others might have been lucky charms, or simply all the cook had on hand. You imagine someone muttering, "Where's the ladle?" and grabbing a sheep jawbone like it's no big deal. A few yards away, someone uncovers a shard of glazed porcelain, bright blue, clearly foreign, possibly Chinese, possibly looted. It would have been rare and treasured, likely used to serve guests of honor or hold particularly precious sauces. You try not to imagine it being used for fermented organ paste. Too late. You crouch beside the cooking pit remains. The firestones are still arranged in a circle, blackened by countless meals. There's a slight smell in the air, dust, ash. Time you press your palm against one of the stones and feel nothing, but in your mind, it's still warm. These are the kitchens of conquest, unmarked, scattered, and often forgotten. But here, stew was shared, bread torn, and jokes told. Maybe even secrets whispered. After all, even world-conquering warlords need gossip and garlic now and then. One of the archaeologists reads aloud a translated inventory list recovered from a Mongol supply cache. It includes 12 sacks of flour, 3 goats alive, 1 cured yak leg, 2 large pots, 8 bundles of firewood, and 1 mysterious jar of brown sauce sour, possibly magical. That last part was scribbled in the margin by a clerk with either a sense of humor or a fear of condiments. You sip from a flask of warm steppe tea and watch the wind dance across the excavation site. Each artifact tells a story of movement, survival, flavor, and fire. These weren't static people. They didn't build towering palaces or marble kitchens, but they left behind the tools of nourishment, spread thin and far like butter on travel. Bread, a soft whistle signals lunch at the dig site, and suddenly you're back in the now. But your thoughts linger in the soil, in the bones, in the echo of a stew pot scraped clean 8 centuries ago. Because sometimes, the best recipe is the one left behind in ash. A little later in the day, you find yourself surrounded by steam and shouting, and not the angry kind, more like the pass me that tallow before it melts again kind. You're standing elbow to elbow with a circle of cooks in what passes for a bustling Mongol kitchen. This one isn't on a cart, it's a stationary camp kitchen, set up near a river crossing for the day. Fish hang drying on a rope, and someone's chopping roots with the calm determination of a person who's definitely sliced their thumb more than once. Right now, everyone's making booze, Mongolian dumplings, and yes, they're the real deal. Dough circles the size of your palm, filled with minced mutton, fat, garlic, and maybe a green thing if you're feeling rebellious. You're handed a piece of dough, already flattened. Your task, pinch it closed without making it explode during steaming. Spoiler, you fail. The cook next to you laughs and fixes your misshapen dumpling with the grace of a noodle whisperer. She tucks the ends like she's wrapping a baby for battle and places it into a giant bamboo steamer, which was probably acquired in China. Because let's face it, good ideas travel. Booze are portable, rich in calories, and deeply satisfying. Steamed in batches and eaten in handfuls, they're the kind of food that makes soldiers happy and keeps grandmothers famous. Each cook has a different touch. Some season theirs with wild onions, others with dried yogurt crumble for temps. One guy swears he adds horsehoof jelly. You pretend not to hear, and then comes the moment. The lid lifts, and a cloud of steam hugs your face like a blanket soaked in lamb dreams. The dumplings glisten, fat bubbling at the seams. You bite in. The filling is hot, juicy, almost peppery. The dough is soft, yielding. Somewhere inside, your ancestors whisper approval. A fun tidbit. Some families made message dumplings, where a tiny pebble or spice was hidden inside to deliver a fortune or prank. Bites the wrong one, and you either found love, or chipped a tooth. Historians are still unclear which outcome was more celebrated. You glance over and see a teenage boy skewering meat onto iron rods, setting them over the fire next to a shallow pot of bubbling grease. The air is thick with scent. Dumplings, roasting lamb, burnt onion. Someone nearby is deep-frying thin bread, twists in rendered fat, and the sound is downright hypnotic. You watch them puff up into golden spirals, then get tossed into a bowl of salt and something yellowish that might be pulverized cheese or dust. You eat it anyway. Across the camp, someone's boiling gurultai mak, a noodle dish layered with meat and broth, and topped with a ladle of sizzling fat. This is serious comfort food, the kind that glues soldiers to campfires and gives them just enough energy to sack a fortress by noon. Historians still debate the origin of Mongolian noodles. Did they borrow from the Chinese, or did the practice develop independently? The pots found near old trade posts suggest cultural cross-pollination. Also, noodles are just objectively good, hard to mess up, easy to carry, and when soaked in meat grease, instant morale booster. Another fringe touch. Some dumpling fillings were mixed with blood. Not in a horror movie way, just as a way to stretch protein and use every part of the animal. Others included fermented curds or even bits of dried fruit, depending on the region and the cook's mood. You take a mental note not to offend anyone who offers you a special dumpling. As the sun tilts westward, the cook fire glow gets cozier. The dumpling station is in full swing, the steamer refilled every few minutes. A tiny child waddles up, steals one, and runs, tripping slightly, but never dropping the prize. You respect the hustle. Someone offers you fermented yogurt, mixed with water and salt, sutei sai. You sip. It's an acquired taste, and you haven't acquired it yet, but you smile, because it's warm and shared. And that matters more out here than any seasoning. You lean back against a log, stomach full, mouth salty, and eyes stinging from the smoke. The cooks are still at it, chopping and ladling and shouting. Across the fire, someone starts singing again, a wordless melody about mountains, horses, and maybe dumplings. Everything smells like meat and effort. You close your eyes. If a Mongol soldier, a merchant, and a wandering monk all sat together for dinner, this is what they'd eat. Dumplings, noodles, fried bread, fat and fire, wrapped in laughter, chanted stories, and the quiet pride of a dumpling folded just right. It's early evening now, and the sky above the camp has turned the color of boiled plums. You're full, sleepy, and vaguely aware that your coat smells like 12 different types of meat. Around you, the camp settles into that peculiar quiet buzz where the fire crackles louder than the people. Someone is sharpening a blade with long, lazy strokes. A child hums while brushing a horse's flank with what appears to be a tuft of sheep fur tied to a stick. Dinner has come and gone, and most of the camp is now lounging in that post-feast lullax left for a few older men, who are bickering loudly about a story you can't quite follow. You lean closer and catch a fragment of the tale. They're arguing about what Genghis Khan refused to eat. You straighten up. That's intriguing, turns out. For all his fearsome reputation, Temujin, better known to you as Genghis, was surprisingly picky about food. According to some court accounts and oral traditions, there were several things he absolutely wouldn't touch. Most notably, fish. Yes, fish. This mighty world conqueror, tamer of empires, was weird about seafood. Historians still argue whether this was due to tribal taboo, personal taste, or a deeply held belief that fish were, quote, cowards of the water. That last part is likely apocryphal, but the Mongol distaste for aquatic creatures was real enough that it shaped supply chains. In fact, some military provisioning guides from the Yuan dynasty note that fish rations were specifically excluded for the imperial family. Instead, Khan preferred good reliable meat, horse, sheep, yak, anything that once grazed under a wide sky and could, if necessary, kick you in the face. He reportedly favored meat that had been air-dried and seasoned only lightly with salt and rendered fat, ideally eaten warm, but acceptable cold. His court cooks developed techniques to slice meat wafer-thin, sometimes marinated in sour mare's milk, sometimes smoked over pine needles for a resinous, herbal Thames. A quirky tidbit: Genghis allegedly had a personal taster, not just for poison, but also to check if food had the right temperature for conquest. Again, that may be exaggerated, but several chronicles mention his sensitivity to hot food being too new, and cold food being too dead. Interpret that however you like. You walk away from the fire circle and wander toward the back edge of the camp where the butchery pit lies. Here, the real work happens, quiet, methodical, necessary. A woman is cleaning a sheep carcass with swift, practiced motions, separating fat, muscle, and offal into distinct baskets. She's humming. There's nothing gory about "It's just another day in the Empire's kitchen." You're told that Genghis, despite his enormous power, often preferred simple meals over grand feasts. There are records of him turning down elaborate Persian banquets in favor of roasted lamb with flatbread and yogurt. Why? Some think it was strategy, a way to bond with his men. Others argue he genuinely liked food that didn't try too hard. One traveler from the Khwarezmian Empire wrote that he once saw the Khan eat a meal of dried meat, hard cheese, and goat broth thickened with flour and pride. That last word might have been a mistranslation of milkskin, but the sentiment sticks. The evening stretches long and slow. You find yourself back near the food fire, sipping something hot and slightly alcoholic. You think it might be barley, wine, or perhaps a highly fermented tea. Either way, your limbs feel heavy in the best way. A nearby elder, face folded like crumpled silk, mutters a joke about how even Genghis Khan would sneak extra dumplings when no one was watching. You smile, and he nods solemnly as if revealing state secrets. Another lesser-known no in Genghis's diet: pickled vegetables, not because he disliked the taste, but because of a belief held by many Mongols that pickling distorted the natural spirit of the ingredient. If it cannot breathe, it should not be eaten, goes one proverb. So while many cultures prized pickled garlic or fermented turnips, the steppe people mostly stuck to drying, smoking, or fermenting in ways that didn't, in their eyes, murder the food's essence. You realize now that Mongol food wasn't just sustenance, it was philosophy, a worldview with hooves and broth. The idea that a meal should reflect the land, the animal, and the rider's journey. Nothing more, nothing less. The fire has burned down to glowing coals. Someone's tossed a bone into the ashes to ward off. Spirits are tradition with murky origins but plenty of drama. You tuck your feet beneath your coat, full and curious and ready to dream about a man who once conquered half the known world, but wouldn't eat a trout. You wake to the sound of clanging metal and someone arguing about onions. The camp is alive again. Smoke curling in lazy spirals from breakfast fires. The grass is wet with dew, and everything smells like wood smoke, sweat, and simmering broth. You sit up, stretch, and hear the unmistakable tink-tink of something being vigorously stir-fried on the step. Yes, indeed. You shuffle toward the noise and find yourself at the edge of a mobile mess station where a heavy, blackened wok sits nestled in a tripod over flames. A burly man in a padded tunic is tossing meat and scallions with practiced wrist flick. Oil spits like a tiny orchestra. Its hypnotic dots stir, dash, fry, dash here. In the heart of Mongol territory is a battlefield favorite. A dish born from conquest, loot, and a brilliant knack for adopting what works. The wok, after all, was a Chinese invention. But the Mongols, they saw its power and said, yes, but portable. And so, this humble, bowl-shaped pan became a conqueror's tool. Just like the bow or the saddle dot. A fun tidbit. Some Mongol cavalry eunuchs traveled with small, folding woks. They'd cook directly over fire, often using animal fat as oil, and meat so thin it cooked in seconds. Onion, garlic, and whatever greens they acquired from passing through unlucky villages were tossed in when available. You peek into the wok. Thin slices of goat sizzle beside shredded radish and something yellow that might be egg. Maybe, hard to say. The cook adds a splash of something that smells fermented and very much alive. He doesn't measure, he just knows. This is not a recipe. This is muscle memory forged by travel, battle, and an extremely forgiving digestive system. Historians still argue whether Mongols truly embraced stir-fry or if it was more of a fringe field adaptation. But archaeological digs near key garrison sites have revealed carbon-scorched pans with angled walls, perfect for tossing food on the move. The evidence suggests that by the 13th century, stir-fry had fully entered the Mongol military menu fast. Hot, minimal waste, maximal calories. As you chew a piece handed to you in a wooden bowl. The flavor explodes. Smoky, fatty, slightly spicy. It's not elegant, but it's energizing. You can see why this dish caught on. It's one part sustenance, one part morale boost, one part proof that anything tastes better when cooked in oil over fire with a little shouting. You wander down the camp row and spot another cook with a smaller wok, preparing what looks like fried dough filled with vegetables. She tells you it's called kusha, Mongolia's version of a meat pie, but crispier. It's hand-sized, folded like a taco, fried in animal fat, and eaten with zero regard for arteries. You take a bite and immediately regret not stealing. Another a fringe observation. Some high-ranking commanders preferred their stir-fry dishes sauced, often with fermented bean paste or soured yogurt thinned with vinegar. This culinary flourish was reportedly picked up in northern China and adapted with local ingredients, proof that even hardened generals had a saucy side. Further down the line, you find a younger cook experimenting. He's stir-frying with millet instead of noodles, adding chopped mutton and wild chives, a nod to Central Asian grains and Korean seasoning, he says, grinning. Mongol fusion. You give him a thumbs up and sneak a second helping. Then there's the spice, minimal but meaningful. The Mongols weren't known for fiery flavors, but black pepper, garlic, mustard seeds, and occasionally cumin made appearances, especially as spoils of war. One chronicle from the Yuan court mentions a paste of bean and pepper used to honor guests and sting the nose. That paste may have been the ancestor of modern sauces in the region. It was thick, brown, and suspiciously funky, possibly soy-based, possibly a mistake. Either way, it became a staple at formal dinners and field camps alike. Not everyone liked it, but everyone respected its aroma. The cook near you suddenly dumps an entire bunch of wild onions into his wok with theatrical flair. Oil flares. Everyone cheers. You're not sure if this is cooking or performance art, but it works. There's joy in the simplicity. A fire, a pan, meat, salt, motion, nothing fancy. Everything perfect. As the sun rises higher, the stir-fry stations wrap up. Pots are scrubbed with sand and dried grass. Woks are cooled and oiled, packed away in leather cases like treasured weapons. The Mongols may have preferred their meat boiled, but when it came to speed, fire, and flair, the wok was their secret sidearm. You stretch again, full and sleepy, soot on your cheeks and oil in your hair. Somewhere in the distance, a bell, not for war, for lunch prep. You smile, because if history teaches anything, it's that empires rise and fall, but lunch always happens. By midday, the steppe has warmed just enough to coax the sourness out of your sweat-soaked tunic. You wander lazily past a row of tethered horses, each twitching its ears like it's judging you for walking instead of riding. Ahead, tucked beside a circle of gears, you spot something unusual. A row of clay pots, sealed with hide lids and arranged in an oddly ceremonial pattern. Nearby, 3 elderly women sit cross-legged, whispering, stirring, and most intriguingly of small bowls to a group of waiting men. Curious, you sit cross-legged too, trying not to crinkle like a leather sack, and accept a bowl from one of the women. It's filled with a pale, viscous liquid. You sniff. It smells creamy, slightly fermented, definitely alive. You've just entered the world of sour cream. Diplomacy. This isn't just lunch, it's negotiation. You sip. It's tangy, smooth, richer than you expected. Somewhere between yogurt and cream cheese, with a wild streak of vinegar. This fermented dairy product, possibly grim or a thick yogurt-based sauce, is both sustenance and social signal. Here, hospitality is measured in curd consistency. On Mongol culture, dairy wasn't just food, it was language. The subtleties of cream thickness, aging time, even fermentation style communicated intent. Offering fresh milk, friendly. Offering well-aged yogurt, very friendly. Offering clotted cream with a side of silence, possibly a marriage proposal. This wasn't lost on their diplomats. According to accounts from Persian and Chinese emissaries, Mongol treaty banquets often featured elaborate dairy presentations, towering stacks of cheese, butter sculptures shaped like horses, and white bowls, filled with symbolic curds. If you could interpret the dairy, you could read the room. A fringe tidbit. One chronicler from the Ilkhanate wrote that a failed alliance nearly came to blows when a bowl of fermented sheep's cream was presented with the wrong orientation handle, to the left instead of the right. The receiving delegate took it as an insult. The hosts insisted it was just windy that day. Historians still argue whether this story is true or just dairy drama. But the fact remains, fermented foods carried weight in Mongol diplomacy. To reject a bowl of yogurt was to spit in the face of peace. Nearby, someone is slicing soft cheese into cubes and skewering them on a stick. He offers you one, and you accept. It's chewy, salty, slightly smoky, possibly smoked over juniper. He says it's from the west, maybe Persia, maybe somewhere the Mongols conquered and said, "Nice cheese, it's ours now." This was the essence of the empire, not just territorial expansion, but culinary adoption. Mongols didn't just conquer cities, they incorporated their menus. A Persian envoy once noted that his hosts asked detailed questions about cheese ripening temperatures during a dinner that also involved military negotiations. You watch as a man approaches the 3 women with a bowl covered in cloth. He presents it like an offering. They inspect it, murmur, then nod approvingly. A peace gift, possibly an apology, possibly a trade. Either way, the bowl disappears into the ritual churn. The churn itself is mesmerizing. Upright leather bag, tied to a wooden frame, pumped by hand or foot. Inside, milk swirls into butter, curds separate from whey, and something like magic happens. Mongols churned while chatting, gossiping, even singing. A well-run camp could produce a gallon of butter in a few hours, just in time for tea or negotiation. You're handed another bowl. This one, thicker, heavier, more cream than milk. You sip, it coats your tongue like velvet and burns slightly going down. Surprise, it's been spiked with something alcoholic, probably barley spirit or mare's milk hooch. You cough politely. The woman next to you grins. Beyond the dairy circle, a fire is burning down to coals. A stew simmers, lamb again, with dried herbs and chunks of soft cheese stirred in just before serving. It's creamy, meaty, and gently sour. A stew made not for soldiers, but for guests. And that's the heart of sour cream diplomacy. Feed first, talk later. You recline against a water skin and let the richness settle. In this world, dairy doesn't just nourish, it negotiates, soothes, and signals. It's peace in a bowl, or war, if you swirl it the wrong way. The wind has picked up slightly. Somewhere a bowl of yogurt slides half an inch clockwise. Someone notices, someone gasps. Just kidding. Probably. The sky turns a shade of steel wool as late afternoon settles in. The light stretches long and lazy across the grass, and the energy of the camp shifts. People speak more softly. Horses snort less. Even the fire crackles quieter, as if it knows what's coming. You're heading toward the outer edge of the camp now, drawn by the smell of something decidedly not festive: dried meat and desperation. A handful of figures crouch around a low fire. They look tired, their clothes damp and travel-worn. These are scouts and soldiers, recently returned from a border patrol. They're hungry, but not celebratory. You sit among them, unnoticed at first, until someone scoots over and hands you a strip of what might be beef, or camel, or goat. Who can say? Welcome to the less glamorous side of Mongol cuisine, siege rations. This isn't the dumpling-slinging, butter-laden feast of earlier. This is practical, tactical, bare-bones food designed to keep warriors alive through frostbite, fatigue, and flaming arrows. The meat is bought air-dried, stripped thin, and hung from horse saddles or tent poles until it resembles parchment. It's impossibly chewy, flavorless at first, then startlingly intense. Salt, smoke, and survival. It lasts forever. And when boiled, it becomes broth. You eat slowly, carefully. Your jaw is already sore. In these mobile encampments, where every ounce of weight matters, and preservation is survival, Bortz is king. Historians still argue whether its origins go back to the early steppe nomads, or were refined during the empire's high tide. But by the time Genghis marched on Buk, dried meat was as essential as arrows, a fringe tidbit. There's evidence that Mongol siege troops would soak Bortz in river water overnight, then reheat it with embers dropped into leather bowls, makeshift slow cooking, sometimes spiced with bark or leftover fat from previous meals. You glance over at one soldier, unwrapping a piece of dried curd from cloth. He breaks it and drops it into the shared pot, thickening the broth. Another tosses in millet. A one-pot miracle emerges, barely flavored, but deeply nourishing. It's a stew of necessity, not indulgence. It's not meant to impress. It's meant to endure. And endure it does. You sip a spoonful. It tastes of endurance. There's a soft drizzle in the air now. You huddle deeper into your cloak and realize that every soldier here has at least 3 food items tucked somewhere in their gear. Bortz, dried cheese, and fat. With just those, they can survive weeks. It's not glamorous, but it's genius. Nearby, one man is sharpening a bone-handled knife and speaking in low tones about the siege of Nish. His voice is hushed, reverent. Not because of the battle itself, but because he'd run out of Bortz. He describes scraping cooked marrow from old bones and mixing it with stale tea, just to feel full. The others nod solemnly. Everyone here has a hunger story. Then comes the tea always, the tea boiled with a pinch of salt and a dab of fat. It's poured into bowls, not sipped but slurped, steam rising like a fog. You hold yours tightly. It warms your hands, your face, your breath. It's bitter, yes, but it cuts the taste of meat fatigue and loneliness, and that loneliness, you realize, is a quiet ingredient in siege food. It's not written on scrolls or recorded in cookbooks, but it's there. Every chew of Bortz, every chunk of rock-hard curd, every silent spoonful of broth, whispers of cold nights and faraway homes. Historians often overlook these moments, the quiet meals, the emergency rations, the way survival food shapes a soldier's spirit. But this was the fuel of empire. Not grand banquets, not court feasts. This right here, a pot of mystery meat and melted cheese, shared by firelight with people too tired to talk. One man offers you the last strip of dried meat. You try to decline, but he insists. Tomorrow, he says, I'll find more. It's not boastful. It's not dramatic. Just practical optimism from someone who knows food is found, not wished for. As the fire dims and the stew pot empties, someone begins humming. No lyrics, just a low, rhythmic tune that rolls across the wet grass like a lullaby for survivors. You pull your cloak tighter, eyes heavy, full not just with food, but with gratitude for the quiet resilience that built history. The camp shifts again as evening deepens. Smoke trails drift lazily into the cooling air, and a handful of stars peek through the low clouds like shy storytellers. You've wandered from the edge of camp toward a larger fire circled, this one, lively, musical, and unmistakably more polished than the rough edges of the siege crew. Tonight's feast is different. Here, under a silk-draped pavilion held up by carved poles, you find a scene equal parts theater and dinner. Cushioned rugs, ceramic bowls stacked with rice, steam wafts from copper pots as servers dressed in finer coats than yours lay out trays of pickled radish, boiled duck, sweet rice balls, and spiced mutton sprinkled with something nutty and fragrant. You blink. Is that cinnamon? It is, because tonight, you're tasting the food of the conquered dot. This is a fusion banquet cuisine curated from the Mongol Empire's vast reach. Persia, Russia, Korea, China, wherever the armies rode, they brought back flavors, and those flavors stuck, like loot, only tastier. You're seated among traders, scribes, and commanders in velvet-lined tunics. The food is rich, layered, and unlike the siege rations or the butter-slick camp stews, this is designed to impress. You reach for a bowl of pilaf, a dish of Persian origin, full of saffron rice, bits of lamb, and slivers of almond. Each bite is like an edible treaty. Historians still argue how much Mongol cuisine was altered by these adopted dishes. Some say it was merely garnish on top of their core dairy meat base. Others suggest that within a generation, the Mongol elite had developed a taste for spices, rice, and foreign sauces, reshaping their menus to reflect their expanding empire. A quirky tidbit: in Yuan dynasty China, Mongol rulers were reportedly obsessed with dumplings, especially the crescent-shaped gaozi, and made court chefs prepare them in enormous quantities, sometimes stuffing them with goose or lotus seed paste to show off their cosmopolitan flair. Diplomats from Korea and Central Asia would bring their own versions to share, leading to heated debates over the correct fold. Tonight's feast is exactly that culinary diplomacy. You're offered flatbreads baked in clay ovens, dipped in a sweet sour plum sauce that may or may not have been reverse-engineered from a Korean royal kitchen. A server spoons fish stew into your bowl, rich with turmeric and fenugreek, possibly a nod to southern coastal influence. You chew slowly. It tastes like a shoreline wrapped in fire. Across the fire pit, a storyteller weaves a tale between courses. He speaks of a Mongol envoy arriving in Baghdad and being offered sherbet made of snow, pomegranate, and honey. The envoy, apparently unimpressed, countered by producing dried lamb, rehydrated with sour mare's milk and wild chive oil. The Baghdadis were horrified, then charmed, then inspired, and the Mongols, to their own surprise, discovered their kind of light sherbet. You look down at your bowl, this one filled with fried dough soaked in honey syrup, sprinkled with sesame, a sweet from the Islamic world, folded into the Mongol feast repertoire by sheer gustatory will. You taste it. It's both dessert and declaration. Someone passes around a jug of rice wine. Another offers barley beer in a bronze goblet that looks suspiciously stolen. You take both. It seems diplomatic. And just like that, you start to see the culinary diplomacy happening in real time. Mongol feasts didn't just feed people. They softened edges, disarmed tensions. What started as conquest became cuisine. Bitterness boiled into broth. Hatred grilled into kebabs. One man, drunk on both wine and victory, raises his voice. "We took cities," he says, "and they gave us garlic." Everyone laughs. But it's not just a joke. It's the truth. The Mongol Empire, for all its fearsome reputation, was also a blender. A traveling spice rack, a moving stew pot that stirred in Persia, the Silk Road, Siberia, and more. Not all conquests ended in blood. Some ended in dinner, and here, under the stars, belly full of pilaf and honey bread, you feel it. This is empire by appetite. A meal made not just to feed, but to remember, to absorb, to digest the world one flavor at a time. Morning again, but not like the others. There's something ceremonial in the air, and anticipation, a hush, a kind of sacred fog that clings to the grass and people's shoulders alike. You wake to the smell of boiled milk and incense. Nearby, white banners flutter from tall poles, each stitched with symbols you don't recognize but feel, somehow, like invitations. You follow the slow procession of figures toward the center of camp. No shouting, no cooking smoke, just a line of people, carrying bowls, jars, and bundles of white cloth. Today is the Festival of White Foods, also known in some traditions as Zargansar, though that name and its customs have shifted over centuries. This springtime celebration marks the new year, the return of light, and the renewal of life. And, very importantly, it revolves entirely around milk. You're handed a bowl the size of a small helmet, filled with layers of white cheese curds. clotted cream, fermented yogurt, and something soft and custard-like you can't identify but would happily dive into. Around you, families spread out wool blankets and begin unpacking their dairy tributes like high-stakes picnic judges. Everywhere you look, white foods, white clothes, white flags, a visual sigh of relief after the long meat-heavy winter. This is Mongol detox, circa 1200. The philosophy is simple: cleanse the body, please the spirits. Start the year light and pure, not by fasting heavens, no, but by feasting. With restraint, the food is rich, yes, but subtle, no spices. Meat, just the vast spectrum of what a single cow, goat, yak, or mare can offer. Historians still argue whether the white food tradition predates the Mongol Empire or was formalized under Genghis's unification efforts. Some suggest it was a spiritual mirror to military order, seasonal pause from conquest to acknowledge the land, the herds, and the gods. A quirky note: participants often sculpted little animals or mountains from butter as offerings. Children competed for whose butter horse looked the fastest. Elders pretended to judge seriously. Everyone tried not to eat the sculptures too early. You sit cross-legged beside an elderly woman who's unwrapping a special package. Inside are already dried curds, shaped like stars. She taps them gently into a bowl of warm milk tea and lets them soften. Eat slow, she murmurs. Let it remember you. Nearby, a young man presents a round wheel of soft cheese wrapped in embroidered cloth. His bride-to-be accepts it with both hands and a shy smile. A dairy engagement, of sorts. Cheese as contract. Another group has stacked cream cakes into a pyramid, each layer sprinkled with sugar and topped with a dab of jam. It's likely from Chinese influence, part of the empire's open-door food policy. Still, it's welcomed here, and everyone takes a bite without questioning which culture made it first. You're passed a bowl of grim, clotted cream skimmed from boiled milk and chilled overnight. It's buttery, thick, almost sweet. Spread over fried bread and paired with tea, it becomes a breakfast of kings. You close your eyes and imagine emperors in yurts, smearing it on ceremonial scones before attending a peace summit. Everywhere, people trade bowls, stories, laughter. Someone strums a two-stringed fiddle. A child sings a verse about a white goat. That brings good luck. Butter sculptures begin to melt slightly under the soft sun, leaning drunkenly like sleepy monuments. And then formality. A high-ranking elder steps forward with a silver ladle. He lifts a bowl of fermented mare's milk high into the air, spins once, and pours a thin stream onto the earth, onto the sky, and onto the wind. A gesture of thanks, a toast to the universe. A small splash lands on your boot. You don't mind. This moment, this ritual of white, isn't about indulgence. It's about rhythm, the cycle of life. You eat to begin again. You consume with intention. You share not because you have plenty, but because sharing makes you rich. Later, someone will boil meat again. Butter will return to broth. But for today, the air is soft, the food is gentle, and the empire breathes through bowls of milk. You take one last spoonful of yogurt, close your eyes, and let it all dissolve on your tongue. You wake the next morning to a scent you haven't smelled in days: sharp, peppery, almost lemony. It cuts through the usual smoke and mutton like a spice merchant barging into a meat locker. You sit up, sniff the air, and follow your nose too. A cluster of traders unpacking tiny cloth-wrapped bundles from lacquered boxes. Inside seeds the size of freckles, jet black, smelling like a dozen kitchens arguing at once. This, you're told, is black cumin, not your supermarket kind. The Mongols called it the fire seed, and it was one of the most coveted spices of the empire. Traded across the Silk Road, taxed into legend, and stuffed into everything from sauces to salves. Black cumin wasn't just flavor, it was power. And here's the twist. For a culture famed for its Mitandary simplicity, the Mongols absolutely adored black cumin when they could get it. Sprinkled over lamb, mixed into pickled root vegetables, sometimes even steeped into tea or added to butter. You're handed a small cake, dense, savory, flecked with cumin and crushed onion. One bite, and your tongue lights up like it's waking from a nap. The flavor is warm, bitter, almost medicinal. You chew slowly. This is not a peasant's snack. This is trade route cuisine. A fun tidbit: cumin was so prized in some Mongol cities that it was counted as currency. In Karakoram, a small pouch of cumin could get you a week's worth of grain or 2 songs from a particularly vain musician. Historians still argue how black cumin spread so widely across Mongol territory. Was it gifted by Persian merchants, swiped from Chinese apothecaries, or simply carried in the saddlebags of a particularly aromatic general? The records are vague. The spice is not. One record from the Ilkhanate court suggests black cumin was the spice of choice for winter survival stews, not just for flavor but for its rumored medicinal properties. It was said to warm the joints, open the breath, and wake the weary soldier. Probably exaggerated, but at altitude, and after your third meal of boiled goat, you'll take it. You move closer to the fire where someone's making bantan, kind of meat porridge thickened with flour balls and spiced with, you guessed it, cumin. The scent makes your spine straighten. Even the horses seem intrigued. Next to the stew pot, the cook is making a rub from crushed cumin and salt, mixed with lamb fat, and spread across thinly sliced meat before roasting it over a low fire. He grins as you watch. For nobles, he says, tapping his temple, and clever guests, you pretend to be clever and get a slice. It's smoky, oily, and surprisingly layered. You catch hints of garlic and wild onion, but it's the cumin that lingers, like someone whispering through your teeth. You chew and consider the irony. The Mongols, masters of austere nutrition, adored this tiny seed that needed importing, cultivating, and careful storage. It's the one ingredient that broke their usual food rules. Further proof, black cumin, taxes. Yes, taxes. In some parts of the empire, cumin shipments were so common that tax clerks developed a shorthand symbol for it, 3 dots over a half moon. Entire ledgers exist tracking cumin trades, cumin tariffs, cumin theft. One poor merchant was fined not for smuggling, but for withholding spice laughter. The meaning is unclear. The effect was not. Later, in the early Yuan dynasty, black cumin was even grown in controlled gardens, one of the few non-native plants allowed space in the emperor's estate. Gardeners were warned to guard it with their lives, or at least, with harsh glares and aggressive coughs. You take another bite of your cumin-stuffed flatbread, and wander past a spice trader's wagon. Inside are jars of other wonders: saffron, dried mint, ginger root, Sichuan peppercorns, some used medicinally, some rarely, but only one gets a locked box and a private guard. Black cumin, the unassuming empire-crossing, tongue-waking seed that spiced the steppes, warmed the sick, and made even the grumpiest Mongol commander mutter, not bad. You close your eyes, the flavor still tingling. The wind picks up. Somewhere, a sheep sneezes. History doesn't always announce itself with a roar. Sometimes it's just a sprinkle. The sky has gone pale gold, the kind that seems painted on with old butter and faded parchment. You sit beneath a lopsided tent, your legs wrapped in a dusty woolen blanket, watching a quiet scene unfold. A young man in robes carefully a scroll, placing tiny stones on its corners to keep it flat against the wind. Around him, 3 monks peer closely, nodding, squinting, murmuring. One of them suddenly bursts into laughter. You've stumbled into something rare. The world of the ghost recipe, scrolls. No, not haunted recipes, though that would be a fun dinner party, but culinary texts copied, preserved, or adapted across the far reaches of the Mongol Empire, many of them incomplete, contradictory, or lost entirely to time. They come from Baghdad, Beijing, Bukhara, and bits of Tibet. Recipes half remembered, miscopied, translated into 3 languages and back again. The scroll the monk is laughing at. It includes an instruction that reads, "Cook until the bones are angry." No one knows what that means, but the chef it was copied from clearly did. You lean in. This scroll appears to be a Yuan-era cooking manual compiled by imperial scribes and Buddhist monks during Kublai Khan's reign. It's written in 3 columns, Mongolian script, classical Chinese, and a bit of Arabic scrawled in the margins, possibly a translator's frantic notes. The recipe of the moment involves stewed lamb thickened with silk threads of root, which may refer to julienne radish, or actual silk. No one's sure. The sauce, described as the brown soul of the horse. Charming. Historians still argue whether these scrolls were truly practical, or more like philosophical food poems. Some recipes are clear enough: boil the meat, add curds, salt, and cumin. But others require ingredients like sky water or moon-aged butter. Try finding that at your local market. A fun tidbit: one fragment, discovered in the ruins of a monastery, includes a 4-line chant meant to be sung while boiling soup. Supposedly, it harmonized the broth. Modern chefs might call it mindfulness. Medieval monks called it seasoning the spirit. These ghost recipes weren't mass-distributed, they were copied by hand, often by scholars more familiar with ink than lamb fat, and it shows. One scroll includes a side note that reads, "If the guest sneezes 3 times, add more salt." Possibly symbolic, possibly a sneeze-triggered flavor test. You'll never know. Next to you, a monk dips a brush into black ink and carefully begins copying another line. He's preserving a yogurt-based stew that allegedly cured insomnia. You smile. Soothing soup from 700 years ago. Now that's bedtime. History, but it wasn't just monks doing the writing. In the Persian courts of the Ilkhanate, cook-stern clerks began compiling their own manuals. These were more technical, precise measurements, cooking times, storage notes. One recipe reads, like a shopping list crossed with a warning, "If the yogurt is too sharp, the stew will betray the tongue." You're not sure what that means either, but it sounds like a kitchen tragedy. The ghost scrolls also include culinary remedies, broth to stop fevers, dumplings for toothaches, a bizarre dish involving dried sheep lung for melancholy. Most of these are probably less effective than a nap, but they reflect a fascinating overlap between food and medicine, science and belief. And let's not forget the forgeries. Yes, fake recipe scrolls were a thing. Some scribes invented dishes entirely, often exaggerating their effects to impress nobles. This pudding restores memory, improves hunting aim, and removes curse of the left shoulder. Sounds legit. One Mongol general reportedly had a favorite stew based on a dream he had while chewing goat fat. The resulting recipe was written down, copied 6 times, and became a royal kitchen staple for 50 years, until someone realized it was just boiled meat with a dramatic origin story. But even if the recipes were questionable, the act of preserving them mattered. These scrolls show how Mongol chefs, monks, and merchants tried to codify a culture built on motion, to pin down flavor with ink, to turn boiling broth into blueprint. You sip a bowl of actual stew while the monks pack up their scrolls. It's simple, just lamb, salt, yogurt, and a little something extra you can't place. Could be herbs, could be sky water. The recipe isn't written anywhere, but the taste, it's unforgettable. The sun has tipped westward again, casting long shadows from the yurts and making the steppe look like a faded old map. You're sitting on a fur-covered bench in a communal circle, warming your hands by the fire, when someone pulls out a scroll for recipes this time, but for laws. They call it the yasa, or sometimes the Great Yasa of Genghis Khan. You've heard whispers about it before. Part legal code, part moral compass, part myth. It covered everything from military conduct to marriage rules, theft penalties, to what happens if your dog bites a diplomat. But today, you're learning about the food laws. Yes, the Mongol Empire actually had culinary commandments, and they weren't just about what to eat. They were about how, when, and especially, who gets what. One of the elders, near you, about a distant cousin who is flogged for stealing a piece of horse liver during a hunting feast. Another adds, he was lucky. There was a man executed once. For soup, you pause. For soup. They nod, quietly, solemnly. The fire crackles, like it's in on the story. Apparently, the man had dipped into the Khan's ceremonial broth before the appointed time. Whether it was an act of hunger or hubris, we'll never know. But under the yatsa, disrespecting the food of state, especially meat designated for the Khan or for religious offering, was a serious crime. A bowl of soup could be sacred. Historians still debate how codified the yasa actually was. Some argue it was an oral code, passed down in fragments. Others insist there were written copies kept in secret royal archives. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, equal parts law and legend. What's not in dispute? The cultural reverence for food as structure. You didn't just eat in Mongol society. You observed, you offered, you followed the rules. Take food sharing, for example. It was mandated that elders and guests be served first. Meat was sliced with ritualistic order, high-quality cuts for the most respected, awful for the younger, unmarried, or unlucky. To jump the order was to disrespect the social pyramid, and the pyramid didn't like that. There were also rules about hunting spoils. If you killed the animal, you got the heart. If the kill was communal, the meat was divided according to status. A tendon here, a rib there, a hunk of shoulder fat passed from warrior to shaman with the precision of sacred choreography. A quirky tidbit, One line of the yasa is believed to have prohibited the spilling of milk intentionally, not for cleanliness, but because milk symbolized prosperity and health. To waste it on purpose was to curse your household. Basically, ancient steppe karma. You're handed a skewer of grilled liver. It's tender, heavily salted, and very much within the rules. You chew carefully, feeling oddly honored. Around you, a younger warrior is being gently corrected for biting into his flatbread before his elder. He blushes, apologizes, and offers his next bite in a gesture of respect. It's not shame, it's rhythm. You realize now, food laws in the Mongol Empire weren't about control for control's sake. They were about cohesion. In a world of constant movement, these rules were anchors. You might sleep under a different sky each night, but the rules of dinner never changed. Another elder chuckles and mentions the meat bowl test. At big gatherings, a shared bowl was passed around. Whoever grabbed the best chunk without looking was declared honorable and just. Anyone who fished around too long, suspect. The bowl was watching. There's laughter now. The stories lighten, but you sense the deeper truth beneath. This was how an empire of nomads built structure, through rituals of meat and manners, and you're part of it now, sipping bone broth slowly, respectfully, in order, hoping no one remembers that time you tried to reach for the cheese before the elder spoke. The fire burns low, the meat's almost gone, but the rules, still simmering. You're awake again, just barely, as the pale fingers of pre-dawn light start pulling at the canvas of your tent. Someone outside is already stirring a pot. The soft chime of wooden ladles and clinking stones means it's time for the most underrated of Mongol rituals, breakfast. And today, breakfast is tsampa. At first glance, it doesn't look like much, just a bowl of brownish powder, a glob of yellow butter, and a splash of hot tea. But when you sit cross-legged beside the fire and watch the preparation unfold, it starts to feel like a ceremony. Tsampa, in its simplest form, is roasted barley flour mixed with tea, butter, and sometimes cheese or milk. It's stirred into a dough-like paste with one's fingers or, more rarely, a carved wooden spoon and eaten in modest scoops that stick to your ribs and your soul. You take your first bite. It's nutty, earthy, warm, like the world's most humble porridge, only denser, more solid, more determined. This was the breakfast of warriors, monks, travelers, and people who had no time for kitchen flair. Sompa didn't spoil, packed icily into pouches, and required only hot liquid and a bit of faith. It was sustenance in its most portable form, and yet, for something so plain, it carried deep significance. Historians still argue whether Zampa originated on the steppe or came via trade with Tibetan monks and traders. Some trace its rise to caravan routes, others claim it predated Genghis himself. But everyone agrees it stuck around for a reason, a quirky detail. Tsampa was often prepared in complete silence before raids or long journeys. Not for that helped, but because the quiet mixing was seen as a moment of focus, a ritual to bind your thoughts, set your intentions, and maybe, just maybe, earn the favor of whatever steppe spirits were paying attention that day. You stir your bowl, the butter swirling in golden ribbons. A woman adds a pinch of dried cheese. Someone else passes around salted milk tea. No one says much, but every motion passing a bowl, sharing a sip is charged with a sleepy kind of reverence. And then come the butter lamps. Dozens of them, glowing softly in the rising light, placed along a ridge of stones or in niches carved into the central altar of the camp. These small vessels made of metal, bone, or clay hold wicks nestled in yak butter, lit during dawn and dusk. They were part of both religious ritual and practical illumination. You watch a boy light one. The butter flickers, steadies, warms the air. He whispers something you can't quite hear. A prayer, a wish, a breakfast menu. The butter lamp has spiritual significance in Mongol and Tibetan culture. It's an offering, a guide, a symbol of impermanence and light. Some are scented with juniper or pine. Others are left plain pure fat for pure thoughts. There's something tender about it. This slow ritual, this quiet glow. In an empire known for thunderous cavalry and cities set ablaze, the image of a child lighting a lamp with a whisper is its own kind of power. A monk joins the circle and begins to hum, low and rhythmic, as he stirs his own bowl of sampa. No words, just the hum. One note for the body, one for the journey, one for the butter. You hum too, almost by accident. You close your eyes and breathe in the scent of roasted grain, warm fat, and old wool. This breakfast isn't flashy. It won't win awards, but it's perfect. Every bite tastes like history, intention, and the need to keep moving. Because the camp will pack soon. The carts will roll. The stew will bubble. But for now, before conquest, before chaos, just sampa and butterlight, you've wandered to the back of the camp again, belly full of sampa and tea, when a pungent, unfamiliar smell hits your nose. Not unpleasant, exactly just assertive. Like cheese that's gone to college and majored in fermentation. You follow your nose and stumble upon a peculiar sight. Leather bags swaying from ropes, half-buried clay jars bubbling gently in the earth, and an old man elbow deep in something that might be cabbage or might be a dare. Congratulations, you've arrived at the fermentation district. Okay, it's not officially called that, but it might as well be, because here, on the fringes of the Mongol camp, fermentation isn't just a food technique, it's a way of life, a preservation tactic, a flavor weapon, a subtle form of time travel. The Mongols fermented everything: milk, meat, vegetables, even water, sometimes, if it had been left in the wrong goat bladder for too long. And somehow, it worked. You start with the classics. Airag fermented mare's milk. We've met her before. Fizzy sharp, a little rude. But now you try chaiji, sour milk drink made from cow or yak milk, fermented until it separates into a thick white curd in a tart, translucent way. You're offered a bowl. It smells like a dairy barn, and a lemon had a long talk. You sip. It's sour, refreshing, slightly alarming. But you know what? It grows on you. Nearby, someone opens a pot that's been sealed with beeswax. Inside, fermented mutton, cubes of meat packed in salt and sealed months ago. It's served cold, thinly sliced, like an ancient charcuterie. The taste, intense, salty, tangy, slightly smoky. You chew carefully. It fights back. A quirky tidbit: fermented meats were sometimes used not just for meals, but for barter. A brick of well-preserved lamb was as good as silver in some border markets, if not better, because you couldn't stew silver. And then there's the vegetables. Yes, they had them when they could get them. Wild onions, radish, sorrel even. Turnips gathered from trade cities or farming outposts. These were often packed into brine jars, left to sour, and used to break the fat monotony of winter diets. Think of it as proto-kimchi with fewer chili flakes and more ambient goat influence. You sample a spoonful from one such jar. It's crunchy, acidic, oddly floral. The old man grins. 3 months, he says. You nod. You're not sure if he means the age of the pickles, or how long it'll stay with you. Historians still argue whether these fermentation techniques were borrowed from Chinese and Central Asian practices or developed independently. But by the 13th century, the Mongols had mastered the art of edible aging, and not just for survival, for flavor. Take yurts, for example, a thick, sun-dried yogurt paste, often stored in slabs and shaved into soups or sauces. It was tart, compact, and potent. Some say a teaspoon could flavor an entire pot. Others say it doubled as emergency deodorant. You hope they're joking. You're handed a thin biscuit smeared with fermented cream cheese and sprinkled with dried herbs. You bite in. It's weird. Good weird. Like Tang and Fat had a reunion party and invited a root vegetable. A nearby woman is stirring fermented turnip mash into boiling water with meat scraps. Her children watch solemnly. One of them hands you a piece of flatbread to scoop some up. You do. It's warm, sour, comforting. The kind of dish you imagine eating during a snowstorm in a felt tent, while wolves howl at the moon and your boots quietly melt. And not all fermented items were food. Some Mongols used fermented milk to clean wounds, believing its acidity helped fight infection. There are even scattered accounts of fermented cow urine being used in folk remedies. But let's skip that bowl, shall we? Fermentation was also a social glue. Families gathered around the churn, passed pickled radishes during winter storytelling, and offered bowls of sour tea to guests as greetings. It was preservation, yes, but also patience. A way to let time soften, deepen, transform. You sip another bowl of chaiji and feel it buzz slightly in your chest. Fermented food isn't flashy. It doesn't shout. It lingers. It waits. It teaches you to trust the process. You look around. At the pots, bags, jars, each one a quiet triumph of survival and flavor. Somewhere nearby, a piece of meat is slowly turning into a delicacy, and you're turning into a believer. You're wandering again, this time through the quieter side of camp where the pots clink less, and the conversations drift more. The fires here are smaller, the cooking slower, the voices softer, and at the heart of it all, women. Not just any women, these are noble women, matriarchs, quartermasters of the Mongol soul. You see them hunched over ledgers scratched into leather, arguing about fat storage, dispatching runners with bundles of dried meat. One of them is stirring soup and negotiating a marriage alliance at the same time. Welcome to the pantry of power. These women weren't just wives. They were logisticians, ration controllers, and, in many cases, de facto rulers, while the men rode out on campaign. If food was strategy, these women were the generals behind the spoons. One of them gestures for you to sit. She hands you a flatbread stuffed with mashed beans and salted greens, leftovers turned royal with just a flick of her wrist. As you chew, she pulls out a bundle of parchment and unwraps it. Inside meal plans you read, dried mutton for 3 days, fat ration adjusted to half lump per warrior, Zampa balls for travel, 1 pot of sweet broth for morale every 5th day. It's like reading a war strategy written in snacks. Historians still argue how much control Mongol noblewomen had over military logistics, but the evidence is compelling. Letters from the Yuan court show royal women ordering supplies, allocating dairy products, and overseeing complex food redistribution systems. Some even signed off on hunting rights and food trade routes. A quirky tidbit: one princess reportedly designed her own yurt cart kitchen with built-in shelves, spice drawers, and a rotating butter churn. Imagine a medieval food truck. It could crush a fence just by turning around. You look around this corner of camp and realize these women aren't feeding just families, they're feeding entire conquest machines. One elder is directing a pickling team. Another is overseeing the butchering of 4 goats with clinical precision. A younger girl is grinding roasted barley for a festival paste. And then there's the ration packed, small leather pouches filled with carefully balanced travel food. You're shown one, a compact stack of borts, a sliver of dried cheese, a pinch of salt, and a waxed lump of sugar. It's like a medieval Lunchable designed for a soldier on horseback. Each pack is tied with a color-coded strip of cloth, red for scouts, green for commanders, white for the cons, messengers. They even have emergency rations tucked into boot soles and saddle flaps, sealed with wax, marked with charcoal, and remembered in ritual. You sit near the fire, watching the nobles at work. Their movements are seamless, packing, stirring, counting, cursing lightly under their breath. This isn't chaos, it's choreography. One woman hands you a pouch of dried apricots, imported from Persia, dipped in sour yogurt, and left to dry again. It's tart, chewy, luxurious, and yet she shrugs, as if to say, this, oh, just something we do between managing armies. You ask how they keep track of it all. She smirks and taps her temple. The conversation drifts to food rotation, spice storage, butter freshness, then to political alliances, trade caravans, and the upcoming storm season. Somehow, it's all connected. For them, a pot of stew isn't just dinner, it's diplomacy. A cheese wheel isn't just a snack, it's tribute. These women were not just cooking, they were calculating, forecasting, holding together the mobile infrastructure of an empire with ladles, scrolls, and ruthless organization. And at the end of it all, they ate last, always last. After the soldiers, after the scouts, after the guests. It wasn't humility, it was strategy. Eat last, and you know how much is left. You take another bite of bean bread and feel the warmth of their fire, the sting of their efficiency. These are the pantry queens, the dairy duchesses, the original prep queens of history. And thanks to them, the Mongol army never ran on empty. It's nighttime now, and the camp is unusually quiet. The fires are low, the pots have cooled, and only a few voices murmur across the hush. You're led by a servant, quiet, quick-footed award, a tent unlike the others. It's larger, darker, trimmed in silk and mystery. Guards flank the entrance, but they step aside without a word. You duck inside and find yourself in a private dining space. Not royal, exactly, but refined. This is the elite, Uratha, inner circle, where generals eat without maps, and advisors drop their titles with their boots. And on the low table before you, a bowl, not large, not ornate, just brown, At first glance, it looks like the aftermath of a cooking accident. A paste, thick and murky, with a sharp, fermented temps that dances in the air like mischief. A quiet voice at your shoulder mutters, "The Emperor's sauce." And suddenly, you understand why people whisper. This sauce, this mysterious, unnamed, unmeasured concoction was not written in scrolls, not served at open feasts. It was passed by taste, by gesture, by long memory, known only to a few, used rarely, respected deeply. Historians still argue what was actually in it. Some say fermented, bean paste, garlic, dried meat, powder, vinegar, and something vaguely nutty. Others claim it was built around the seven sours, a legendary combination of vinegars, roots, and curdled dairy whose original formula is lost to time. A quirky tidbit: one Yuan dynasty record refers to a dark lamb sauce so potent it was believed to sway decisions during council meetings. Was it this one, or just one of many imperial pastes? No one knows for sure. The recipe vanished, or maybe was never written down. You dip your finger in. It's bold, funky, meaty, sour, rich. There's an undertone of herbs, a faint numbing from what might be Sichuan pepper. It clings to your tongue like a secret. You've never tasted anything like it, and yet it feels familiar, like all the parts of a stew distilled into a single punch. You're told it's served only to honored guests, key commanders, and occasionally to test loyalty. Some say, if you flinch at the first bite, you're not ready. If you ask for seconds, you might be. You eat more. The sauce is served over a sliver of roasted yak. The meat is dense, smoky, but the sauce transforms it, elevates it into something ceremonial. The table falls silent as others tastes. Nods pass between bites. It's not casual dining, it's communion. And yet no one will say what's in it. Not fully. The cook, a stooped man with ashes-strict hands, offers only a shrug. Depends on the day, he says. Depends on the rider. You learn that the sauce changes, tweaked depending on who's present. More sour for Persian guests. More umami for Chinese generals. More heat for frontier warriors. It adapts, shifts, evolves, but always within the shadow of its original essence. You sip fermented tea between bites, the flavors swirling. It's like being let in on a joke that took 800 years to set up. This isn't just food, it's ritual, memory, performance. You look around and realize, this was the Mongols' secret weapon. Not just the speed of their horses or the fear of their name, but their understanding that food binds loyalty deeper than fear, that a sauce, carefully made, humbly served, could hold an empire together longer than a sword. One story, half legend, half whisper, tells of a traitor whose tongue was cut, not for betrayal, but for leaking the sauce's recipe. Harsh, maybe, symbolic, absolutely. You finish the last bite and feel a strange calm. Full, yes, but more than that, connected, like you've been allowed to borrow someone else's taste memory for a moment. As you leave the tent, a servant wipes the bowl clean with bread and tosses the cloth into the fire, because some recipes aren't meant to linger, they're meant to haunt. Dawn breaks colder than usual, a frost curling in the grass like forgotten lace. The mood in camp is tense, the energy sharpened. You sense something has shifted. People move faster, eyes dart quicker, pots clang with less rhythm and more urgency. You find yourself near a line of horses being loaded, but they're not carrying trade goods or stew pots today. They're carrying sacks of salt, bundles of dried dung, barrels sealed tight with resin, and beside them, archers, silent, focused. You're not going to breakfast, going to war. But this war isn't just fought with arrows, it's fought with food. Welcome to one of the Mongol Empire's most overlooked strategies, culinary warfare. At the height of their conquests, the Mongols learned to weaponize not just steel but supply chains, cut off roads, reroute rivers, salt the earth, even poison the soup. Yes, soup. One tale, told in a low voice by an elderly camp cook, involves a siege where the Mongols sent a captured cook back into a walled city with strict instructions to season the soup served to the city's guards with a powder of discomfort. No one's quite sure what it was. Ground berries, spoiled butter, a toxic fungus. But within 3 days, the garrison developed what the cook calls unpleasant urgency, and the walls were breached. Historians still argue whether this tactic was widespread or apocryphal, but the Mongols were undeniably masters of psychological pressure, starving out enemies, burning food stores, damming water sources, and even flooding farmland to force surrender. A quirky tidbit: there's a record of a Mongol general offering a captured village a peace cauldron, a massive pot of soup, set just outside the gates, simmering for hours. As hunger set in, the scent alone cracked morale. By nightfall, the gates opened, no arrows fired, just stew served. You join a supply crew heading toward a fortified hillside settlement. Along the way, they scatter rotten meat along paths, not just to taint supplies, but to attract predators, wolves, hyenas, anything to sow chaos. A field officer explains their methods: meat buried with dung to rot faster, barrels of sour milk rolled downhill to confuse scent trails, even cheese pouches laced with spices meant to cause digestive distress. You wince and admire it, reluctantly. Another technique: salt denial. By blocking salt trade routes or raiding caravans, the Mongols weakened the diets of enemy troops. A soldier without salt is a soldier who tires quickly, loses muscle strength, and worst of all complains, loudly. You arrive at a forward camp just as a fire is being lit. A pot is hung, not for food, but to boil horse dung into a sticky tar used to sabotage enemy grain stores. You ask if that's really necessary. A woman hands you a ball of tarred millet and says, "You try eating it." You don't. Some units carried pouches of fermented fat laced with strong herbs. These could be hurled into wells, changing the water's taste, sometimes even sickening those who drank it. And it didn't take much, just enough to shake confidence. And perhaps the most elegant tactic: disinformation through food. Captured cooks were sometimes sent back with fake recipes, instructing enemy chefs to honor Mongol style with dishes that required absurd quantities of fat, rare herbs, or long boiling recipes designed to waste time, deplete stores, or spark kitchen revolt. It sounds ridiculous until you realize that a single failed banquet could break a treaty. But perhaps the darkest food weapon was famine. When zeking cities, the Mongols would burn crop fields miles beyond the walls, not just to starve the people inside, but to eliminate any hope of regrowth. They thought in seasons, not days. You can almost hear it in their planning. You surrender today, or starve next spring. You walk past a soldier tying cheese rations to his horse's saddle. He's quiet, efficient, his eyes fixed on the smoke in the distance. He's not angry, he's hungry, but not for food, for control. And in the Mongol playbook, control often started with the stomach. You sit down beside a pile of dried onions, watching as cooks separate the ones meant for dinner from the ones meant for deception. The line between nourishment and sabotage is thin, here sometimes as thin as a knife's edge. The wind shifts, the fire crackles. Someone stirs a pot. You close your eyes and think about the strange power of a bowl of soup, how it can warm, disarm, or destroy. Night again, and this time it feels final. Not in a dramatic battle horns blaring sort of way, in that gentle, quiet hush that wraps around you when the fire's burned low and the stew pot's been scraped clean. You've returned to the heart of the camp, where a feast is being prepared not for conquest, not for politics, but for remembrance. It's the last supper of the Golden Horde. You sit cross-legged among elders, cooks, and travelers. The mood is softer now, tinged with something nostalgic. Like everyone knows this meal matters, not because it's the biggest or fanciest, but because it tastes like the end of something grand. The table is laid with care: slow-roasted lamb, barley flatbreads, thick yogurt with garlic and mint. A pot of broth simmers, not hurried, just steady. Everything feels deliberate, sacred even. A boy passes around a plate of dumplings. Another pours wine from a clay jug marked with the emblem of a long-fallen khanate. The meat is seasoned with cumin and coriander spices, traded through cities that once bowed to Mongol banners. You taste echoes in every bite. Historians still argue when exactly the Golden Horde ended. Was it a battle loss, a failed succession, a slow erosion of power through diplomacy and disease? But here, tonight, around this fire, you feel the truth. Sometimes, empires don't fall, they simmer down. A quirky tidbit: in some Mongol traditions, the last meal before leaving a long-occupied region included a symbolic offering of white food, milk, cheese, yogurt, placed on a high rock or hill as a gesture of gratitude and closure. You see that now, just beyond the camp. A small bowl placed under the stars. Someone begins to sing. A wordless tune, old and slow. Others hum along, not loudly, just enough to keep time with the crackle of the fire. You close your eyes and let it wash over you. The food isn't grand, but it's comforting. Not extravagant, but complete. A boiled stew, a flat cake of pressed curds, a small clay bowl of fermented mare's milk, passed around like a final toast. You drink, you understand. This is not the food of conquest. This is the food of memory. You're told stories, some true, some embroidered, about Khans who couldn't sleep unless they heard the bubble of stew beside their yurt, about generals who rode into battle with cheese tied to their belts like medals, about a princess who demanded her wedding feast include pickled radishes so sour they caused negotiation. Laughter bubbles up. It's light, real. And then silence, not awkward, not fearful, just still. You stare at the final bowl of thick lentil stew with lamb and dried plum, a dish believed to be popular in the Empire's twilight. It smells sweet and meaty, with just a whisper of smoke. You take one last bite, and with that, the feast ends. You lean back against a rolled sheepskin, staring at the stars above, your belly warm, your mind fuzzy. Around you, people begin to doze. The fire's low now, just embers. The cooks are asleep. Even the horses seem to dream. And you're full of stories, flavors, quiet, awe. You didn't just taste the Mongol Empire, you lived its meals. From siege stew to diplomatic dumplings, from fermented pickles to ghost sauces, from battlefield broth to butterlit breakfasts. And as the last star flickers overhead, you realize that food was never just about survival. Here it was memory, movement, magic. Now, as we drift toward the final edge of tonight's story, let your breath slow down, soft and even like the smoke rising from the last fire in the camp. Picture that yurt you've been staying in. Quiet, now, its canvas warm with the last of the day's sun. The stew pot has been washed and hung, the somper packed, the butter lamps snuffed out with a whisper. Outside, the horses shift in their sleep, hooves twitching in some dream of distant plains. The night air is cool and clean, tinged with milk and earth and old stories. You curl deeper into your blanket, still carrying the taste of cumin and slow-boiled mutton on your tongue. The last song of the evening still hums behind your ears, slow and wordless. You're not just full, part of something. You've walked alongside cooks and soldiers, scribes and spies, noble women and noodle makers. You've tasted secrets, heard laughter in 3 languages, and stirred a pot that spans centuries. There's nothing left to do now. No more recipes, no more riddles. Just this slow, heavy exhale as you feel your whole body settling, like a yurt pegged into calm earth, like a stew simmering to silence, like a memory finding its home. Let the steppe wind carry you off now. Let the stars fade gently. Let the last bite linger. You've traveled well, and now it's time to rest. Greater than end of script, sweet dreams.